Good morning, students. I welcome you on the platform of DIAS, and this is one of the renowned institutes, particularly for the science stream, providing coaching to the people who are opting physics, chemistry, and maths as the optional, and apart from the GS. The topic which I'm going to cover today, it will be pertaining to the governance. Governance is one of the core areas of paper 2. Polity and governance and social justice, these are the core areas. And why governance is very important? Governance is very important primarily keeping in with the fact that if you try to relate governance with paper 4, that is your ethics paper. See, majority of the case studies that you will be getting on paper 4, they will be based on the governance issue. So that being the reason, governance becomes very crucial for paper 2 also as well as paper 4. And you will also find a large number of topics, you will also find a good number of topics common in both paper 2 and paper 4, particularly if I talk about the governance. So that's why it becomes very important. Now, in this very first class, first I will be giving you a background of what actually is governance all about. Why are we giving so much significance, so much importance on the topic of governance? See, the thing that becomes very important for the governance is that any policy which is made by the government, any scheme which is started by the government, they are meant for the people living down the line. They are meant for the people who are living on the margins. It is meant for them. Now, whether the benefits of the policy of the government, whether the benefits of the programs of the government, they are reaching down the line or not, that becomes the subject matter of governance. Our Honorable Prime Minister keeps on saying that less government and more governance. What does it mean? When he says less government and more governance, means there are so many institutions involved in the process of governance. But the stress is to be given on the process of governance and less on the government. Less on the rules and regulations and more on the fact that benefits of the schemes of the government should be reaching down the line. All right. The former Prime Minister of India, is Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, has always been saying that for every 1 rupee being spent by the central government, by the time it reaches down the line, it remains just 12 paise. So that makes the difference. Why? Because we are somewhere lacking in the governance, whatever may be the reason, but we are lacking somewhere in the process of the governance. So the emphasis is more on the process, the emphasis is more on execution of the laws. Emphasis is more on the execution and implementation of the schemes that is started by the government. That is the main thing. In fact, let me tell you that when India became independent in 1947, we say that one revolution that was completed was the political revolution. The political revolution was over when India became independent in 1947. But this was not the complete revolution. What was needed was the social revolution. And the social revolution means when people become free in the true sense of the term. Means it is not only the question of political freedom, it is also the question of economic freedom. When people living down the line, they do not have the 2 squares meal, they are not having the basic amenities of life, then what becomes very important is to create the social revolution, to move from political revolution to the social revolution. And in creating that social revolution successfully, governance becomes very important. Institutions of the government becomes very important because they are the one, particularly if I talk about the civil services, there is a saying that when we talk about the civil servants, there is a saying that about when you talk about the civil servants, why do we use the word servant for them? Nowadays, if you call somebody who has qualified civil services, and if you ask him that, are you a servant? He would feel very bad about it. He would not consider himself to be a servant. Servant, whose servant we are talking about? We are talking about servant for the people living down the line. You have to serve. You are, apart from being an employee of the government, what is more important is that you are servant of the people. Because This constitution which has been created, this has been dedicated to the people. It starts from the word we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign socialist democratic republic. Means people are the sovereign. People are the sovereign. And if people starve in this country, if farmers commit suicide in this country, this means this process of social revolution is not complete. So you have to relate this governance with the process of social revolution. The bureaucracy is, see, there is a concept what we call barefoot bureaucracy. What is this concept of barefoot bureaucracy? And that becomes very significant in the way of governance, because governance is a very is a term which we can consider to be having a wider connotation. It is not simply the question of law and order of this country. It's not simply the question of law and order. It is also the question of providing the basic amenities of life to the basic amenities of life to the people. That becomes very important. So when we use the word barefoot bureaucracy, means what? That if you are a district magistrate, all of a sudden there is a flood in your area, and by 12 o'clock midnight you get a call that there is a flood. Now this means, would you be waiting for your shoes? See, barefoot bureaucracy means we will not waste any time. Without wasting any time, and even you are barefoot, you just move on to ensure that the people who are suffering, the sufferings of the people because of the flood, you will be immediately making arrangements for creating embankments or something like that, so that the people who are likely to suffer because of the flood, they could be taken to the safe place. Safety of the people becomes very important. That is what the concept of barefoot bureaucracy is there. So in the whole process that I'm talking about, see, the social revolution becomes very important. So you have to understand the concept of governance by linking it with the social revolution, because bureaucracy, the civil servants, they have an important role in creating this social revolution. And if bureaucracy, because see, there are two servants in this country, what we call the politicians, who are the temporary servant. They will be coming to power for 5 years, and you are not even sure whether the government will run for 5 years. So they are the temporary servants. But you have the permanent servants. Civil servants are the permanent servants. So they owe a responsibility towards the people. So that's why governance becomes very important. All right. Now, so what exactly our emphasis will be when we talk about this paper? See, our emphasis will be the bodies which are responsible for making the planning, and the bodies which are responsible for executing the planning that has been made by the government. So planning and execution becomes very important. All right. So what we have in mind? We have in mind the government. We have in mind the institutions of the government. We have in mind government, we have in mind institutions of the government, we have in mind the policies of the government, we have in mind the schemes started by the government, and primarily this is not sufficient, this is not sufficient, this is not sufficient. This will all become meaningless if you are lacking in the implementation. So implementation and execution, that is what is the subject matter of governance, and we need to concentrate upon that. And unless and until we are giving emphasis on the implementation, the process, the entire functioning of the government becomes meaningless. Because why the government is there? We are living in an era of what we call the welfare state. We are living in an era of welfare state, and in welfare state, the responsibility of the government is to ensure that people have the basic amenities of life, not only food, clothing and shelter, but also education. All the basic amenities of life should be made available to the people of this country. Only then, that is why if you look into the preamble, you will find the goal of the preamble is socio-economic justice. And how do you establish socio-economic justice? If you are lacking in the implementation part. So that being the reason, the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, is going on, always would put an emphasis on the process of governance, less government and more governance. So governance becomes very important. All right. So that will be the core area of my lecture would be confined to the governance portion. Now, but in the background, how do I start? I cannot start straightly switching over to the topic of governance. I'll have to give you a background about the structure of the government. Say, unless and until. So what I will be doing is that I will be giving you some emphasis on the structure of the government, and after talking about the structure of the government, we'll be switching over to the topic of the governance. What exactly is the structure of the government? Because governance comes out of the structure of the government. Structure, you must understand, maybe because many of you are not from the humanities stream, many of you are from the science system, so it may not be possible for you to understand the governance directly unless and until you understand what exactly is the process, what exactly is the structure of the government of this country. So let us start with, I've given you a background of governance, and let us start with what exactly is the structure of the government. We'll start with the structure of the government. Every government has a structure, whether we talk about the government of India, whether we talk about the government of the United Kingdom, whether we talk about the government of the United States of America. See, every government has a structure and every government has a process. All right, so let us talk about the structure of the government. Usually when we talk about the structure of the government, first thing that comes to our mind is about the forms of the government. Forms of government. What exactly is the form of the government in this country? Usually we'll find these days, in the days of democracy, usually you will find two categories of government. You will find one, the parliamentary form of government, and other you will find the presidential form of government. So it is essential for us to understand this before we switch over to the topic of governance exactly, because so it is essential that we understand the process of the government, the structure of the government. So when we talk about the structure, we have the two kinds of government in the world. We have either the presidential government or the parliamentary government. Now, in case of United States of America, you have the presidential government. In case of India, in case of UK, we have the parliamentary form of government. Now, why have we adopted parliamentary form of government? But before coming to that, we must understand what exactly is parliamentary government, how it is different from the presidential form of government. The core difference when you find between the parliamentary government and the presidential government will be based on the fact of what we call the separation of power. It is based on the concept of separation of power. Now, separation of power, when we talk about separation of power, means what? When we talk about the separation of power, what we have in mind is separation of power among three organs of the government. See, executive, legislature, and judiciary. I mean, these are the three crucial organs of the government. Correct? Legislature makes the laws, executive executes the law, and judiciary interprets the law, safeguards the constitution, and takes care of the disputes in the society. So we have three organs of the government: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Now, if there is a watertight compartment between the three, watertight compartments, absolutely they are separate from each other. All right, nobody could be interfering in the affairs of each other. So that point of time we call this there is a complete separation of power. So when there is a complete separation of power, it leads us to a presidential form of government. Complete separation of power means presidential form of government. But in parliamentary form of government like that of ours and also like that of United Kingdom, what we find, there is no complete separation of power. All right. Why? There is a separation of power in a very limited sense. In a limited sense, in what? Because your executive is drawn out of the legislation. Your executive is not a part of the legislature. It is drawn out of the legislature. For example, who is the executive in India? Say, executive in India would be considered to be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. Okay? Or sometimes parliamentary government is also known as the cabinet government. So cabinet is because size of the Council of Ministers is very large, very huge, so they cannot always meet. So that is why we have made it a cabinet, and cabinet, it is the cabinet which takes all important decisions about the country. All right. So who is the executive? The cabinet or the council of ministers. Now, who are members of the council of ministers? Who are members of the council of ministers? Those people who are also the MPs, members of parliaments, they become the member of council of ministers. This means there is no separation of power between executive and legislature, because your executive is drawn out of legislature. This means there is an intermingling of legislature and executive. This means there is no separation of power. So the major difference between two forms of the government is there would be some other difference also, but primarily it would be the complete, there in the one case there is separation of power, and in the other case there is no complete separation of power. Yes, judiciary is separate from executive and legislature, agreed. Judiciary is separate from, all efforts have been made for the independence of the judiciary, so and keeping it separate from judiciary, legislature and the executive. But what you need to understand is that executive is drawn out of legislature, so this means there is no complete separation of power, and that is the major difference between parliamentary government and the presidential form of government. One more difference I will like to point out here is that in presidential government there is a single head. He is head of the state and he is head of the government. In presidential government there is a single head. President of United States of America is head of the state also and head of the government also. But in case of parliamentary government, we have two heads, what you call. We have one head that we have is we have a nominal head, we have two heads, and we have a real head. Prime Minister is the real head and the President of India is the nominal head. So we have two heads in this country. Okay. So we have a Prime Minister as the real head and President of India as the nominal head. So we have two differences. Now, Prime Minister is the head of the government and President is head of the state. Even though all the decisions of this country are taken in the name of the President of India, but that is only in the constitutional sense. Primarily for all practical sense, whatever the Council of Ministers decides, headed by the Prime Minister, President has in toto to agree with that. So decision will be taken by the cabinet, headed by the Prime Minister, but it will be taken in the name of the President. All executive decision of the government will be taken in the name of the President of India. This means we have two heads, nominal heads and the real heads. But in case of President of United States of America, there is a single head, nominal head. He's a nominal head also, and he's the real. He's head of the state and he's head of the government also. So that is the another major difference between parliamentary government and the presidential form of government. Now, so when we talk about the structure of the government, we have adopted a parliamentary form of government in this country. Now, the question that may come to your mind, why did not we adopt? Because several times there has been a debate in this country that we should be switching over to shifting from the parliamentary government to the presidential government, because in presidential government it is easier to take decisions, and because it makes the president very powerful. It makes the president very powerful, and a country like India, which is having so much of the diversity, should be shifting over to the presidential form of government. This debate was there particularly when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of this country. Nowadays, that debate is not there. So what we have in this country is the presidency, the parliamentary form of government. All right. Now, when we talk about the parliamentary form of government, now the question that you may be having in mind is that why did we adopt the parliamentary form of government? See, there are 2-3 crucial reasons for this, why we adopted a parliamentary form of government and not the presidential form of government. The first important reason is that we were quite familiar with the working of the parliamentary system in this country. All right. because we have been ruled by the Britishers for quite over a longer period of time, and because their style of functioning, their way of working, so we were quite used to the parliamentary institutions in this country. Whether we talk about the different acts that was passed in this country, Act of 1909, 1935, so all these were based on the system of parliamentary form of government. So our close association with the parliamentary form of government was the first fundamental factor that made us accept that form of government. Second point that we need to consider in mind is that we have a lot of diversity in this country. India is a diversified country. So many languages, so many culture, so many castes, so many regions. So we are a diversified country. And when you are living in a diversified country, what you require is a wider representation to the different sections of the society. And wider representation to the different sections of the society would be more easier to get in the parliamentary form of government, because in the parliamentary form of government we held elections across the country, and when you held elections across the country, it is possible to get a wider representation from the different sections of the society, whether you call it in terms of the caste, whether you talk in terms of region or religion. So wider representation is possible in the parliamentary form of government. So that being the reason, we have adopted a parliamentary form of government. Now when the constitution was, when we had studied several constitutions of the world, and what we could find is that in many countries there was always a conflict between legislature and the executive. So what we did, we adopted a parliamentary form of government because that would avoid the conflict between executive and the legislature. So by the time India became independent, we had so many constitutions of the world having worked. So we could look into that. And we wanted to avoid a conflict between executive and the legislature. And since executive is drawn out of the legislature, so there is hardly any possibility of a conflict between executive and the legislature in the parliamentary form of government. So that being the reason, we adopted a parliamentary form of government in this country. Now, the point that we need to understand is that the second aspect when we talk about the structure of the government, the second aspect of the structure of the government when we talk about is that how to, India being such a huge country, and the government, central government is sitting in Delhi, and there are several state governments. We have a region, some states we have in the northeastern portion of the country. We have, so how to run this government, and to run this government successfully, what you require is a territorial division of power. So the second aspect of the structure of the government is the territorial division of power. First aspect I have tried to explain is the form of government, right? And the second aspect is territorial division of power. Means a division of power between union and the states. How to govern this country? See, it is not possible to govern this country, such a huge country, such a diversified country, without having a without having a procedure for the territorial division of power. And that is not only true of India, that is true of all the countries of the world, all the huge countries. We are not living in an era of a Greek city-state where the states used to be very small. All right. But now, when you are living in such a huge state, such a diversified country, and when the responsibility of the government is welfare, we are living in an era of welfare state. Means government is responsible for the welfare of the people. So in such a situation, how to govern this country without having a proper territorial division of power? So that become the reason. So on that basis, when we talk about the division of power, territorial division of power, on that basis we have two forms. One is what we have, the federal structure, and the other that we have the unitary structure. So we have two kind of structures in the different government, in the different countries. One, we have the unitary structure, and secondly, we have the federal structure. Now, what happens? What is the difference between the two? In federal structure, the units of the government, the units of the government, they have largely, they are autonomous. So you are giving autonomy, you are giving some sort of what we call about the regional autonomy, that on certain subjects they would be free and independent to take their decisions. So you have a regional autonomy. So what we talk of the federal government, when you talk of the federal government, you are giving basic level of autonomy, basic level of decision making power to the units. So we have that, on that account we have the regional autonomy, we have the federal government. But in unitary government, power is centralized. Here you find decentralization of power. This federal government is based on the concept of, based on the notion of decentralization of power between central government and government of the provinces. Some place you call them the provinces, in some place you call them the states. Meaning is one and the same. So a division of power, decentralization of power between union government and the state government. Alright, so for that you have to provide a regional autonomy to this. Why it was essential? Because India was, at the time of independence, India was probably ruled by more than 600 princely states, and many of them not prepared to join the Indian government. They wanted a standstill agreement. They wanted to remain independent from India. Alright. So in order to bring them into the fold of the government or the central government, into the Indian fold, it was essential that they would not agree to it unless and until we are giving them some autonomy. So keeping that thing in mind, we adopted a federal structure of the government in this country. Alright. Now, then we have a unitary government. Unitary government's power is centralized. Example, United Kingdom. Example, China. Example, France. These are the countries where the power is centralized. It is not that the local units are not there, but the local units that exist in these countries, they would be enjoying only those powers which are delegated to them by the central government. What the point? Here, the states are not dependent on the center. Here the division of power between union government and the state government is well defined in the Constitution of India itself. Constitution of India provides for 3 lists, what we call union list, state list and concurrent list. 3 lists are there. Union government would be making laws on all the matters sued in the union list, state government on all the matters in the state list, and on concurrent list, both union government and the central government union government and the state government could be making laws. But in case of a conflict, union law is going to prevail. It is clearly mentioned. Then, suppose there is any subject which is not there in either of the 3 lists, there could be a possibility, because when the constitution was made, there was hardly any subject like software, hardware. There is no such subject. Alright. There is no subject like the cyber law. So on those areas, those subjects which is not mentioned in either of the 3 lists, that would be covered under a list what we call residuary powers. Now this means any subject which is not mentioned in either of the 3 lists, on that central government, union government will be empowered to make laws. So everything is well defined in the Constitution of India, by India. So for the subject on which state government would be making laws, that is very clearly mentioned in the Constitution itself. So that is why I said we have adopted a federal structure, and it was essential keeping in view the regional aspirations of the princely states at that point of time. That was essential. Now, this structure that we have adopted, I was talking about the parliamentary structure. Now this parliamentary structure is not only at the central level, it is also at the state level. That you have to understand. As we have a prime minister in this country, and as we have a president in this country, similarly we have a governor in the state, and similarly we have a chief minister in the state. As we have the 2 houses of the legislature at the union level, we have the Lok Sabha and the Raj Sabha. So at the same level, we also have legislative assembly and legislative council in the state. All the states, they do not have the legislative council. Some of the states, they have the legislative council. All right. Now, the point that you need to understand is that the parliamentary form of government that we have adopted is available both at the central level and at the state level. So, state government would be well within its ambit, within its power to make laws on the subject mentioned in the state list. Alright, so structure of the government at the union level and at the state level, they are the same. Alright, so that is the point that also you need to understand. Now, so we have federal government, we have unitary government, and we in India have adopted the federal structure. Alright, now going further about this, what we need to understand is the fact there are two models of federation available in the world. One is the US model, another is the Canadian model. In US model of federation, states are largely independent. Level of independence given to the states in the what you call the model of federation that is adopted by the United States of America. The states have lot of autonomy. In fact, largely states have autonomy. All right. Now, what has happened is they define the power of limited power of the central government, and on rest of the things, state government would be making a laws. All right. So that is the thing. But here we have the kind of structure we have is we have a centralized kind of federation. When centralized kind of federation, there are different names by which Indian federation is known. People call it a quasi-federation, people call it a cooperative federation, so on and so forth. But largely we have a centralized federation, means the scheme of things, in the scheme of division of power, central government is more powerful. Central government has been given more power. So we have a centralized federation. So that also you need to understand, because when you try to understand governance, it will not be possible for you to understand unless and until you are aware of the fact what kind of structure we have. Now let me give you an example. Why the current farmers' agitation became a crucial issue for this country, both for government as well as for the governance. Why it became very important? You know, agriculture is a state subject. Central government making a law on agriculture, which is a state subject, on certain pretext that for the trade related to agricultural products, on that central government is empowered to make a law. But primarily agriculture is a state subject. So I'm just giving an example why you should be very much careful, why you should be aware of the structure of the government in this country. Okay, so we have a federal, but Indian Federation, nowhere in the Constitution of India we have used the word federation. Nowhere it is used. What is used is union of states, and the similar. So why did I say that? We are quite similar to, we have adopted the Canadian Federation, because in Canadian Constitution also they mention states, they mention that union of states. Nowhere the word federation has been used. So what we have is the union of states now. So nowhere, so it is not exactly the kind of federation as you try to understand if you look into that from the US point of view. If you look into that, we are not that kind of federation. We are a centralized federation. All right. Now, why? Because usually when the federation is formed in two ways. One way is that states, they come together and for certain things they want to create a federation, as is the case of the United States of America. The states have come together and decided to create a federation, maybe for their security, maybe in terms of foreign policy, maybe in terms of currency. So they have decided certain subjects on which central government would be moved. So federation is created when the states, so what we call the coming together federation. When the states come together and form federation. All right. Now, in case of India, it is basically the dispersal element which is very important. Why not? Because this is not a model of coming together federation. All the states, they have not come together. All the states, they have not come together to form federation. Had that been the case, we would not have faced difficulties in so far as including Hyderabad and including Jammu and Kashmir. So we had a lot of difficulties. Thanks to the Iron Man of India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who had to struggle a lot to bring all the states into the fold, into the Indian fold, because largely they wanted. So it is not a model of coming together federation. So we had to take care of that, and that is why we have used the word union of states. Instead of federation, we have word the union of states. All right. So giving them an autonomy so that they could come together. All right. So that is the thing. So we have a union of states. So the two models of federation usually find in the world, one model that is the US model, and the second model is the Canadian model, and we have followed a Canadian model. So about structure of the government, two things I have told you. One is the form of the government, and second is about the territorial division of power. All right. Now, the third thing that we need to understand when we talk about the structure of the government is the organs of the government. So that I've already described, that I already explained earlier while talking about the division of power between central government and the state government, that we have three organs of the government, that is legislature, executive, and judiciary. These are the three organs of the government that we have in this country. All right, and this division of power between legislature, executive, and judiciary, that you find at the state level also. Here you have the parliament, and there you have the legislative assemblies. Here you have the cabinet headed by the prime minister, and there you have the cabinet headed by the chief minister. Here you have the Supreme Court, and there you have the High Court. So this organs of the government, also at the level of the center and also at the level of state, they are the same. So we have the three organs of the government: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Now, but the difference that you need to understand is that judiciary in this country is independent from legislature and from the executive, and judiciary plays an important role. But you need to understand one point very clearly. If you compare Indian system of government with the US system of government, that our judiciary is integrated one. Our judiciary is integrated one. And integrated means what? See, right from the lower court to the high court to the Supreme Court. So there is an integration in the sense that any decision given by the lower court could be challenged in the high court. If you are not satisfied with the decision of the high court, you could be challenging the Supreme Court. So there is an integrated judiciary. All right. In US system, there is no integrated judiciary because they have a complete model of federation, a true model of federation. In that, what happens is that any case that you are challenging in the state, any case that is put up in a state, that case cannot be taken up by the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court. That cannot be taken. So whatever is the decision of the court of a state, that would be final. You cannot take up a state case to the Supreme Court of United States of America. So there is no integrated judiciary. Not only that, see, every state United States of America, they have a different kind of taxation structure. They have a different law, a different kind of taxation structure. So they have a complete kind of federal structure, unlike the Indian federal structure. So in that sense, we do not have a complete separation of power. We have a limited separation of power. So that you need to understand. All right. All right. Now, after giving you a brief idea about the structure of this country and the Indian model, and now finally, before I switch over to the main area, let me tell you is that what is the difference between Indian structure of the government and the British structure of the government. That will give you a fair idea about it. See, when we talk about the Indian model of government and when we talk about the British model, what is the difference that you find so far as the structure is concerned? What is the difference between the two, Indian model and the British model? You see, in India, we have a republican system. We have a republican system. In British, we have the monarchical system. We have the monarchical system. Means monarchy, which is Monarchical system means you have a hereditary head. All right. And in Indian model of government, Indian structure of the government, we have the republican system because President of India is also elected. And who participate in the elections of the President of India? Members of both the houses of parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, and members of the legislative assembly of all the states. Alright? They participate. So, you have an elected president. You have a republican model, you have an elected president, and here head of the state is hereditary, and here you have a head of state which is elected head. So we have a republican model and they have a monarchical model. Alright. Now, one more difference, basic difference that you will find in this is that in British model there is a sovereignty of the parliament. Parliament is sovereign, and that becomes very important. Sovereignty of parliament means law passed by the parliament, law made by the parliament cannot be challenged in the court, cannot be challenged in the Supreme Court. See, law passed by the parliament is supreme. So we have a parliamentary sovereignty. That is not the case with India. In India, we have a via media model. We have adopted somewhere between what we call is a via media between a parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy. What we have? We have a via media between parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy. We have adopted a via media in between the two. So parliament is not completely sovereign because according to Article 13, any law passed by the parliament, if contravenes the provision of the constitution, it could be declared null and void by the Supreme Court. Several times law passed by the parliament have been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. Also, Supreme Court has introduced the concept of basic structure. Though it is nowhere mentioned in the constitution, but we have a clause of basic structure. Supreme Court has invented this clause. Any law passed by the parliament, if Supreme Court thinks that it has contravened, it has destroyed the basic structure of the constitution, and what is the basic structure, that is decided by the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court has given a list of the basic structure, and the list is not final. Supreme Court would go on adding to that list. All right. That being the case, what we have is we do not have the complete parliamentary sovereignty. We have adopted a via media between parliamentary sovereignty and the judicial supremacy. So that being the reason, all right. So this is the core difference between the British model and even though we have adopted a parliamentary form of government, but we have adopted is the British. We have adopted a British model of parliamentary form of government, but despite adopting a British model, we have kept some difference, okay, keeping in view the Indian requirements. So that is the basic difference between the two models. All right. Let us quickly shift to the governance. I just introduced about the structure of the government, and let us now come to the portion of the governance. What exactly is how this is done, what exactly I'll be doing in this topic. The first topic that I will be discussing when we talk about the governance, first we'll be talking about, the first topic is about the central government. What exactly do we talk about when we talk about the central government? Okay. The thing that in India, central government, as I have told you, we have a centralized model of federation, and India having so much of diversity. So to keep the unity and integrity of the country, the primary responsibility is, even though law and order, you will be surprised to know that law and order in India, law and order, police, this is a state subject. All right. But still, the primary responsibility of making the laws, primary responsibility for execution of laws, and primary responsibility for the security and integrity of the country, and primary responsibility for this, for ensuring the proper governance in this country goes to the central government. So keeping that thing in mind, role of the central government becomes very important. what exactly is the role of the central government, how does it function, what are the different departments. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the structure of the central government. All right. Now the central government is basically divided into various ministries, and it is divided into various ministries or departments. The first point that you need to understand is that central government is divided into various ministries and various departments. All right. And various departments and ministries coming together, clubbed together, they would be called as what we call central secretariat. They would be central secretariat. What constitutes of central secretariat? Central secretariat constitutes of all the ministries of the central government and all the departments of the central government. All right. So we have the primary body for making a policy decision for the entire country is central secretariat, which includes all the ministries and all the departments that you need to understand. All right. Now, why do we talk about, why have you used the word department? Because every ministry will have a 2 to 4 departments. Every ministry will have a 2 to 4 departments. There could be some ministry also without a department, so do not get confused. There could be some ministry without a department also. But every ministry will have at least 2 to 4 departments. Every ministry will have 2 to 4 departments. However, there could be a ministry without any department. For example, Ministry of External Affairs, okay, doesn't have any department. It has a different wings, but it doesn't have any different department. All right. So any department. So there could be a ministry. There could be ministry without having a department also. All right. Now, every department, every ministry, every department, every ministry is placed under a one minister, one cabinet minister. Every ministry is placed under one cabinet minister. So every ministry is headed by one cabinet minister. But again, this is not the rule. There could be exception, that there could be a ministry without a cabinet minister. All right. So every ministry is headed by a cabinet minister, and to assist the cabinet minister, we have a state minister. The state minister, do not confuse with the minister of a particular state like Uttar Pradesh. It is not. Minister of state means to assist him there would be a minister who is called the state minister or a deputy minister. All right. But so every ministry has a cabinet minister, and to assist him there is a state minister or minister of state. There is a minister of state, but there could be a ministry where there is no cabinet minister, and that ministry is simply headed by a minister of state, and it is called Minister of State Independent Portfolio. Because there is no cabinet minister in that ministry. Got the point? So there could be a small ministry without having a cabinet minister. So that ministry could be headed by a person of a minister of state rank, and it is called Minister of State Independent Portfolio. Got the point? So you have a ministry. Normally you would have a cabinet minister, and to assist him you will have a minister of state, but you could also have a ministry where there is no cabinet minister and where there is simply minister of state having independent charge of that department. That may be possible. All right. Again, one more exception you need to understand. There could be certain departments which could be without any minister. There could be a department also without a minister. There could be a department without a minister. For example, we have a department what we call, which is directly controlled by the PM. There could be a department. For example, we have a Department of Atomic Energy. So Department of Atomic Energy. Now, this Department of Atomic Energy is directly controlled by the PMO, and it is directly controlled by the PMO, headed by the Prime Minister. So there is no ministry. So what I have told you, there could be there is a ministry, central government, under central government there is a central secretariat, and central secretariat consists of all the ministries and departments coming together. All right. Now, so there could be, every ministry would be headed by a Minister of Cabinet rank, and to assist him there would be a Minister of State. But there could be a ministry without any cabinet minister, and it could simply be headed by a Minister of State, and it is known as Minister of State Independent Charge. All right. And then also I have told you there could be a department without a minister, without a proper minister, or without a ministry. So, for example, I have given you Department of Atomic Energy, which directly comes under the purview of PMO, headed by the Prime Minister. All right. So, you could have both the kind of situation. All right. Now, how this is done, how this allocation of function between different ministries and departments, how this is done. So, for this, we need to refer to Article 77 of the Indian Constitution. See, this creation of the department, this creation of ministry, we have to refer to Article 77, which empowers the President of India. Article 77 empowers the President of India to make rules for the smooth functioning of the central government. To make rules for the smooth functioning of the central government, for a smooth transaction of business. So there is Article 77. All right. And this Article 77 becomes the basis of what we call the portfolio system. Now, Constitution of India doesn't mention about the portfolio system as such, but this is based on, this has come out of the Article 77, that President of India is empowered to make rules for the smooth functioning of the different departments, different ministries, for smooth operation of the government business. Okay, it could be making a rule, and that has become the basis of what we call portfolio system. So you find Home Minister, you find Defense Minister, you find Education Minister, you find Culture Minister. So different ministries that you have find, Petroleum Minister, Coal Minister that you find, all these ministries have been created under an Article 77, and that process is called portfolio system. All right, so that is what you need to understand. Okay, this means under portfolio system, every minister is made in charge of a particular department. Home Minister would be separate, Defense Minister would be separate, Education Minister would be separate. So every ministry would be placed under one cabinet minister or a Minister of State having independent charge. Okay. And that system is called portfolio system, and from where the system has come? This system has come out of Article 77 of the Constitution. Okay, so the concept of ministry or departments has originated out of the portfolio system. All right. Now, another important point that you need to understand is there is we have allocation of business rules 1961. That becomes very crucial. Allocation of business rule 1961 is all ministries and departments of the central government, the division of power between different ministries and departments, and how they would function. They are all based on allocation of business rules 1961. So the current departments of the different departments and different ministries of government of India, they have been divided, they have been created based on the allocation of business rules 1961. That becomes very important. All right. Now, coming to, I have talked about the ministry and I have talked about the departments. Now coming to the different ministries, how does it function? When we talk about the ministries, when we talk about different ministries, you see, it has basically three components. First component that it has, what we call is the political component, or you can say the political head. Okay. Then we have the secretarial component. Okay. So then you have at that place you have a secretary. Every ministry will have a secretary and IAS officer. So that is secretarial component. One, you have the political component, that would be a cabinet minister. Who would be that? The cabinet minister or minister of state, independent portfolio, independent charge. Okay, so he would be the political head of that department. All right, and who would be the secretarial head? Secretarial head would be the secretary. Now, secretary, revenue secretary, finance secretary, home secretary, defense secretary, all IAS officers. All right, so you have a secretarial head. And third is you have the executing organ. So three components. See, where the planning is made here and when it is executed or implemented. So every ministry will have a three components. Okay, you have the political organization that would be headed by the cabinet minister, secretarial organization headed by the secretary, okay, and the executive organ which would be controlled by head of the department, and he would be known by different names. Sometimes you call them director, sometimes you call them director general. So they are known by different names. But so every ministry will have a three organs, three components: political head, cabinet minister, secretarial head, a departmental secretary, and then you have the executing organ, that is known as director, director general, controller, all right, inspector general, chief controller. So they could be known by any names. Do not go on designation. All right. Now, so here you have political head, and then you have, and this political head is assisted by Minister of State. So you have a political head, a cabinet minister, and headed by what you call Minister of State. Okay, Minister of State. Minister of State. All right. Now there you have a secretary, and secretary is assisted by, and secretary is usually, as we all know, is the civil servant. So you have a joint secretary, deputy secretary, under secretary. You could be having joint secretary. You could be having a deputy secretary. Or like you could somewhere you also have the additional secretary. Then you could also have the under secretary. So there would be different civil servants to assist him, and most of them, they are of the IAS rank. They are the civil servants. So you have, every ministry have three things when you talk about the structure: political, secretarial, and executive. So there you have officials belonging to, civil servants belonging to different rank, and that is in order of seniority. So you have a secretary, additional secretary, joint secretary, deputy secretary, under secretary, and so on and so forth. All right. So you will have this, and there you have executing organ, you have the director general and other officials. Now, when we learn about this, this structure of the central government and how does it function, the point that we need to understand is the secretarial department would not simply consist of ministers of the IAS officers. There would also be officers of the lower rank. Okay, there would be also officers of the lower rank. For example, there would be section officers. So there would be stenotypist and ordinary typist. There are so many people. So not simple secretarial organization, because it is not only the secretaries, different secretaries of different rank, but it is also the secretary and the secretarial office. This is important. All right. And now coming down to, when we talk about, let us come to the point of structure and hierarchy of this government. Let us come to the point of what we call structure and hierarchy. Now, what is the structure and hierarchy of these officials? Now, so every ministry, as I have told you, is divided into, so you have a ministry, and every ministry is divided into different departments. Every department is divided into different wings. So there is a ministry, you have a department, every ministry is divided into different departments, and then every department is divided into different wings. Okay, every wing is divided into different division. Every division, every ministry, every wing is divided into different divisions, and every division is divided into what you call different branch, and different branch is divided into different section. So at the lowest level you have the section officer. So how the ministry functions is, ministry is divided into different departments, departments is divided into different wings, different wing is divided into different divisions, division is divided into different branch, different branch is divided into different section. Alright, and so at the lowest level you have the section officer, and at the topmost level you have a cabinet minister, or you have the secretary. Okay, so when we talk about the secretariat level, you have the secretary at the topmost level and section officer at the lowest level. So ministry divided into different departments, department into different wings, wings into division, division into branch, and branch into different sections that you have. Okay, now another important point that we need to understand is, now ministry, you have the cabinet minister or you have the state minister. You have at the ministry level you have the cabinet minister or the state level. Okay, and then department is headed by a secretary. Now every department is headed by a secretary. All right, and every wing is headed by additional secretary or joint secretary. So additional or joint. This is not a watertight rule. Okay, this is not a watertight rule, but this is normal process. Okay, so wing is headed by additional secretary or joint secretary. Then every division is headed by, either you call them a deputy secretary, or you call them deputy secretary, or you call them director. So some ministry they would have a director, and some place they would have a deputy secretary. So every division is headed by a deputy secretary or a director. Then every branch would be headed by the officers of what we call the under secretary rank. So he would be under secretary, and here would be section officer. All right, so what we have, ministry headed by a cabinet minister, and to assist him there would be minister of state. Every department would be headed by a secretary. Sometimes they are also known as what you call deputy secretary. Small department could be headed by a deputy secretary also. So you have a secretary, then you have wing is headed by additional secretary or joint secretary, then division is headed by a deputy secretary or officers of the director rank, and the branch is headed by under secretary, and section is headed by a section officer. So this is how the ministry functions. All right. So ministry, department, wings, division, branch, and section, that is what you need to understand and you need to remember when you talk about the structure and hierarchy of a ministry. Alright, now going further, what we find when we talk about this, going further is what we call is there is a system when you talk about the structure of the central government. There is a system what we call split system. What exactly is the split system? When you talk about the split system is that, see, this secretarial function in this country and secretarial departments have been constituted in a manner that at the higher level, secretary and the secretariat, central secretariat, it remains responsible only for planning the things, and only for planning for formulation of a policy and formulation of a planning, and execution is not within the purview of the secretarial officers. It is not within the purview of the central secretariat. It is outside that. So in order to ensure that there is a separation between separation between the policy formulation and policy execution, and the responsibility is also divided. The people who are responsible for making the planning and the people who would be responsible for making the policy for the entire country, they would not be involved in the process of execution. And this system of keeping the planning separate from execution, or keeping the execution separate from the planning, is known as the split system. Alright, that exactly is the definition of the split system. So we have adopted the split system. So the central secretariat or the secretarial organization at the highest level in this country, they are simply responsible for formulation of the planning, formulation of the different schemes, but they would not be involved in the execution, and that responsibility would be assigned to an executing organ. As I have told you, they are, when we talked about the structure, I told you that there is a political head, there is a secretarial head, and there is an executing head. So the executing organization has been kept separate from the policy formulation organization. That process is known as split system, and that is what we have followed. Now, the question is, task of policy execution is left to the executing agencies. So that, why this is done? This is done to ensure that there is a proper governance in this country. Because if somebody who is making the policy also, taking the decision also, and the same person is also involved in executing the same, so there could be a problem in that. So keeping execution of the policies and the planning separate from policy making things, what we have adopted is the split system, and this split system is the crucial for this governance in this country. It is crucial for governance in this country. So when we talk about the governance, you must understand what the split system is. Alright, now let us find out why have we adopted the split system. Why have we adopted the split system, and why split system is very crucial for us, First important point that you need to understand, that the split system enables the policymakers to have an independent thinking, to have a broader outlook about, because a secretary is not a secretary of only of a department. He is not a secretary of a ministry. He is a secretary of the government of India. That you need to understand. Every secretary working in every department, every ministry, is not a secretary only of that. He is an IAS officer, and he is a secretary of the government of India. Today he is functioning in one ministry, tomorrow he could be functioning in another ministry also. Alright, so why this split system has been formulated? Because to keep in view the national requirement of this country. Because a secretary has to have a wider national outlook. He may be belonging to one cadre, he may be belonging to what we call the Bihar cadre, but it doesn't mean that he would be formulating only such rules and regulations which should be beneficial to the state of Bihar. No. See, he has to have a broader outlook. So in order to ensure that there is a complete impartiality in policy making, alright, so that is why policy execution has been kept completely separate from policy planning. Alright, so for that we have the first reason why we have adopted this thing. Secondly important is that why we have adopted the split system. Second reason for this is that it becomes possible to enable the secretaries to get the feedback from the executing agencies from the entire country. A policy which is made, it's not made only for a state, it is made for the entire country. So if it is possible for the secretary working in the central secretariat to get a feedback from different executing agencies which are working in different states, and making improvement in the policy further based on the feedback so far as execution is concerned. So that being the reason, okay, so since, as I have already told you, he is secretary not only of a department, he is a secretary of the entire country. So it becomes possible to implement all the feedback that he received from different executing agencies. So that is why we have adopted the split system. One more important point is that this encourages specialization, because specialization means one who is responsible for policy planning and policy formulation, he is not involved in execution. So this leads to a system of specialization between the executing organ and between the organ who are policy formulators. Okay, so that being also the reason we have adopted this split system. It leads to a system of specialization and system of delegation, because everything cannot be done. Everything cannot be done at only one end, and everything cannot be done only by one person. So what you need is and when you talk about the governance is basically a system of delegation. If your delegation system is not proper, governance would not be there. All right. So to ensure proper governance, to ensure proper delegation, to ensure specialization, we have adopted the split system in this country. All right. Now, another important reason why we have adopted a split system is that in order to keep the size of the secretarial organization small, if you are combining together policy implementing department and policy execution department also, the size of the secretarial organization will be too huge and it will be unmanageable. So in order to ensure that size of the secretariat is manageable, it is small enough to be manageable, so that is why also we have adopted this split system. All right. And lastly, why we have adopted a split system, because see, this split system that we talk about between policy planning and policy execution helps central secretariat, helps the secretaries in proper evaluation of the policies. Because see, when they are making the policy also and executing the policy also, so that would not give them enough opportunity to evaluate. But since the execution is done by the other officials responsible for it, other department, so they would be in a position to evaluate the working of that program. And evaluation is a very important component of what you call is the governance, because it is based on the evaluation of the implementation of a particular program and policies of the government that actually governance is dependent upon that. Any policy that has been made by the government and how it is being implemented and executed. See, this evaluating responsibility goes to the secretarial department. So for them, because of the split system, it becomes easy for them to implement that. It becomes easy for them to evaluate the policies that they have made, how they are being implemented, and what are the lacunas in it, what are the shortfalls in that. So they would be in a position to do it impartially, because they are only responsible for planning and evaluation and they are not responsible for execution. So these are some of the reasons why have we adopted the split system in this country. All right. Now, coming to the point of what is the difference between, see, we have adopted a split system. And let us see how this model, how our model of secretarial system, how Indian secretarial model is different from what is there in the British model, even though we have copied the model from there. So British model is known as what we call Whitehall model. British model of structure of the government is called Whitehall model. Let us see how this what is the difference between Britain's Whitehall model and India's own secretarial model. Let us see the difference. Now, the major difference that you will find, I was just trying to explain the split system. See, the major difference find in British Whitehall model, a secretary or a secretarial organization is responsible both for policy planning and policy implementation and policy execution. In India, we have kept the two. So split model is the basic difference. In British Whitehall model, a secretarial organization is responsible both for policy planning as well as for policy execution of the things. Okay, so there is no difference between a planning division and executing division. Planning division, policy making division and executing division, they are one and the same. So somebody who is formulating a policy is the same person who is also executing the decision. Alright, so that is the thing. But in India, what we have? We have adopted, even though we have adopted a British model, but there is a variation from the Whitehall model. In one sense is that in India, in fact, we have two sets of organs, one for policy planning and another for policy execution. That is what is known as the split system. So what model we have adopted is, you have to understand that there are two models. Other model we have adopted, and that is what's called the Indian model of secretarial system, wherein we are separating policy planning from policy execution, is based on the Swiss model. In Switzerland also, what we find when we look into the structure of the governance, we find that in Swiss model, policy planning has been kept separate from policy execution. Alright, so that was about why have we adopted and what is the difference from the Whitehall model. Okay, now let us come to the point of what are the role of a central secretariat. What job is done by central secretariat and why it is essential for you. It is essential for you because you are going to be a part of this you are going to be a part of this system. Once you qualify this examination, after crossing all three legs, you are going to be a part of this system. You are a prospective civil servant, and being a prospective civil servant, you ought to know, it is your responsibility to understand. So, and this will also help you in your interview. When you go to interview, they may be asking question because it is a part of your syllabus. So they could be asking you a question about the structure of the government. So you should be aware of the structure of the government because you are likely to be a part of that structure. Right? So you should be knowing that. Now, what are the role and functions of a secretariat? Means we have talked about what we are talking about. We are talking about the central secretariat of the central government. So what are usually the functions performed by a secretariat? Okay. Now, the first important function that is performed by the secretariat is providing assistance to the minister. Assistance to minister. See, there you would be politically headed by, every ministry is politically headed by a minister. Alright, and he is a temporary servant and you are the permanent servant, as I told you in the beginning. Alright, so responsibility is more of yours. And the minister would be dependent on you because every decision that the minister takes would be dependent on what information, what feedback you are providing to the minister. Alright, so your first primary responsibility of a secretariat is to provide assistance to the minister in what? Policy making. You would be providing assistance in the policy making. You would be providing assistance not only in policy making, you would be providing assistance also in policy modification if it is not working well. So you would be providing assistance in policy making and policy editing. So the first function performed by the secretariat is to provide assistance to the minister in policy making and policy modification. Alright. Second most important function is, your minister, what is the role of a minister? Your minister plays a crucial role in parliamentary legislation, in all the laws that is going to be made in the parliament, that is going to be passed by the parliament, all the laws related to your ministry. So you would be providing assistance, you would be providing feedback, you would be providing information, so you would be assisting the minister in framing of legislation. Framing of legislation. So these ministers may not have, they are the political head of your ministry, but they may not have any kind of expertise. Alright, because somebody who is a commerce minister, not necessarily he is well versed in commerce. Somebody who is an education minister, not exactly that he or she is having very good idea of the education or the Ministry of HRD. So you being a civil servant, you being a talented person, so you would be providing assistance to the minister. A secretary is providing, a secretariat is providing assistance to the minister in framing of legislation. All right. So when Parliament passes a law, they are barely giving, they are barely mentioning the outline of the law. All the details of the law is exactly, all the details of the law, they are formulated by the secretariat. All right. So in framing of legislation also, secretariat has an important responsibility. All right. And then sectoral planning. There would be different sectors. So how sector-wise planning making, sectoral planning, on that also you have a sector-wise planning and what we say the policy formulation. What should be the policy for the higher education? What should be the policy for the school education? So for everything, so you provide sectoral planning. Secretariat plays important role in sectoral planning and policy formulation that you need to understand. All right. Then budgeting and controlling. The budgeting aspect, the financial aspect. So that is also and controlling, budgeting and controlling, that is also the responsibility of the secretariat. Okay, so budgeting and controlling. All right. Supervision of execution of policies. See, even though policy execution has been kept separate from policy policy making under the split system, but overall supervision responsibility, overall evaluative responsibility goes to the secretariat only. Even though the department has separate, how the planning is going to be executed, what are the lacunas, what are the shortfalls, so that is supervision over the execution of policies. That responsibility is also of the central secretariat. All right. This means you would have secretariat will have a responsibility, we can say, overall coordination between policy planning department and policy execution department. So secretariat will have a responsibility so far as overall coordination is concerned between policy planning and policy execution. All right. Then one of the most important job of central secretariat, of the secretariat and the departmental secretary. You see, many times you will come across that a question is asked in the parliament related to the ministry. All right. Now, for example, there is a question related to coal. There is a question related to education. So, in that case, it is the secretariat which is providing all the information to the minister, concerned minister, so that he is able to answer the queries of the parliament. Got the point? So, as a secretary or being a part of the secretariat, it is the responsibility of the secretary to provide assistance to the minister. So, in answering parliamentary queries related to that ministry. So, that is the another crucial responsibility. All right, because I will be repeating that point, because you are a permanent servant. All right, and your minister would be dependent on you. The data they have to give, the questions is asked to them, so they would be dependent on you. So you will be providing assistance. Secretariat is responsible for providing assistance to the concerned minister. Regarding what? Regarding answering all the queries related to the ministry in the parliament. That becomes very important. All right. Are the major functions which are provided by, these are the major functions which is done by the secretariat. All right. The last point I will be making today is what we have. We have a system what we call tenure system. It is essential for you to understand the tenure system. What exactly is the tenure system? When we talk about the functioning of the central government, see, almost as a matter of rule in this country, every secretary or every official that is working in the secretariat, okay, basically you belong to states. So you are given a choice when you fill up the form. You give a choice that which cadre you want to join. All right. So every official working in the secretary or in the secretariat, they belong to the states. All right. And after serving certain period of services in the state, okay, they would be stationed at the central secretariat. All the IAS officers, all right, all the IAS officers, they basically belong to a state, all right, but they have to serve certain period of years with the central government. So you would be, if you are selected an IAS officer, maybe for a certain period you have served as a district magistrate, as a DM of a district, or at various positions within a state. So for certain period of time, you would be sent on deputation with the central government. All right. You need to serve certain period of years with the central secretariat. Every IAS officer. So every civil servant. All right. And so most of the posts at the level of the central secretariat, they are filled from the officers who are sent on deputation by the state governments to the center, number one, or sometimes they are drawn from other central departments. All right. So that is the point that you need to understand. And this arrangement in official language, all right. So after serving for certain period of years, you need to serve for certain years at the central government. So that system is known as the tenure system. This system is known as the tenure system. Okay. Now, so under the tenure system, staffing. See, this means central secretariat doesn't have its own staff. See, all its officials, higher officials, they are drawn from the states. So this means under this tenure system, every official is working at the central secretariat is drawn from the states, government. Okay, and they have to serve for certain period of fixed years. That could vary. There is no watertight rule. So for a certain period of fixed years, they would have to work with the central secretariat, and that system is known as the tenure system. For example, secretary and joint secretary, they need to serve for 5 years with the central government. Once deputed, they need to serve for 5 years, at least they need to serve for 5 years. All right. Now, deputy secretary, he is required to work for 4 years. Deputy secretary, he is required to serve at the central level for a period of 4 years. Then you have an under secretary, they need to serve for a period of 3 years. So likewise, there is no need to go in further detail. So you have, what I wanted to make you understand, my purpose was to understand this tenure system. All right. So tenure system is that every officer working in the secretary, he belongs to the state cadre, and he is sent by the state to serve at the center, to serve the central secretariat, and that system is known as the tenure system. All right, that is known as the tenure system. All right, now, and if we can say that tenure system is Administrative Reforms Committee report 1967 supported this tenure system. They said that no, tenure system is good for this country because we are a country, we are a federal structure. So the people who have worked in the state, and when they are coming and working at the central level, because they have, so central secretariat is having officials from different states, and they have served in all the states. So this shows India's federal structure, that after working for a certain period of years in different states, they have a knowledge, they have information about what are the problems of different states. So it gives a wider perspective to the central secretariat. It gives an all India character to the central secretariat. All right. So that becomes very necessary. Now, briefly about why have we adopted this tenure system? Why this tenure system? I do not know whether you get this question in the examination or not, but you should be knowing that, because what happens is that this examination see, you will have to formulate the answer to different questions, and you never know the knowledge that you have gained in this lecture, where you will be using this knowledge, and whether you would be using this knowledge in governance or maybe in ethics. You never know where you will, or you in politics. So you could be using this knowledge anywhere, because this examination is more about an integrative approach, or an integrated approach. You cannot delink paper 1 from paper 2, or paper 2 from paper 3, and paper 3 from paper 4. You cannot do that. And if you do that, you will not be successful. You need to have an integrated approach. All right. Sometimes you find that they will be asking a question from geography, and you never know that this question also fits into the international relation, When they ask you a question on the South China Sea, now you get confused whether it is from geography or whether it is from the international relation. You never know about that. So kindly have a very integrated approach when you are preparing for this examination. So talking about why have we adopted the tenure system. All right. The first major advantage of this tenure system is that it leads to a better coordination between central government and the state government. Because since the people at the central secretariat, they have already served for a certain number of years at the states, so this leads to a better coordination between central government and the state government, or between center and the states. All right. Second is, this provides a first-hand experience. This tenure system provides a first-hand experience, field experience, to the secretarial staff. See, when you have already worked in the field, and after working in the field you have come to the central secretariat, this means you have got a good exposure, you have got a field experience, and that experience you could be using it in your policy planning and formulation. So good exposure for the people after they have worked in the states. All right. Then this creates a huge pool of officials. This creates a huge pool of officials who have an all India perspective. See, all those officials, as I have told you, they have already worked in the states for a certain period of years, and when they come to the center, so this tenure system helps in creating a huge pool of officials having a wider perspective and having an all India character. All right. Now, and then you get an equal opportunity to work both at the center and at the state level. Okay. Now, it gives a real perspective, it gives a national perspective to the policy planning. This is a very important point. It gives a national perspective to the policy planning. When you have worked in different states and then when you come to the center, so this gives a national perspective to the entire policy and planning of the central government. All right. And when you formulate your policy, since you have already worked in the states, when you formulate your policies in such a manner that, because since you have worked in the state, you know what are the difficulties in execution of those policies, you have already faced them. So you would be formulating your policy in a very realistic manner because you have already worked in the states. So execution becomes easier, and your policy formulation gets a more realistic approach, more realistic. You become more realistic. Why? Because you have already been exposed to working in the states. That point is also again very important. All right. And then it provides an opportunity to the officials working in the Central Secretariat to work in a multifarious environment. See, for a certain period of years you work in the revenue department, then for a certain period of you work in the environment department. So you work in different departments. You have already worked in the states. So this provides an opportunity to work in multifarious environment. That becomes very crucial. All right. So if you are asked a question on tenure system and what the tenure system is, or in fact, the entire working of the Central Secretariat is based on the tenure system, and you should be able to answer that question. All right. But again, let me tell you, when we evaluate this tenure system is not very strong in this country. Not very strong. Why it is not very strong? It is not very strong because of two reasons. Why it's not very strong? For two reasons. One reason for it that sometimes you will find this because the state government, your state government, they are not very happy in releasing some of their good officials for the central government. Sometimes they do not want to transfer them, they don't want to send them reputation. This becomes very problem. Secondly, when you come to the center and when you have worked in the national capital for a certain number of years, you never want to go back to the state. That becomes another problem. So what is the problem with the tenure system is that this tenure system is facing a problem because it is not very strict, it is not very watertight. Why? Because sometimes because of the states, sometimes the chief minister would not be willing to release its good officials for the center. And sometimes when you have already come here, you would not be willing to go back to the state. So that becomes the problem. Alright, so tenure system has its own problem that we should be able to understand. Alright, now so states are not always enthusiastic. States are not always enthusiastic and to send their good officials, and sometimes what happens when you have already worked for a certain period of years, you are not willing to go. There could be some personal reasons. You have your children studying in the schools in the capital, and also their education will be disturbed, so you may not be willing to go back to your state, and some other reasons could also be there. All right. In fact, you see, the tenure system is when we have adopted this tenure system. You see, tenure system we have adopted. Because when India was working with the Britishers, when we are in the British control, so the tenure system is when India was working like a unitary state. We have adopted the system, but during the British phase, India was working like there was absolutely a centralized administration, and India was working like a unitary system, all right, and not like a federal system, all right. But since we have adopted a federal structure and based on creation of autonomous unit, all right. So why central government why state governments they are not willing to? So this tenure system was more suitable when we were working under the Britishers, but we have adopted that because at that time India was working as an entire unit, all right. So this means there was no difference between center and the state. But what is happening is that now we have adopted a federal structure, and when I'm telling you that why state governments sometimes are not willing to send their officials to the center, it is because they feel that, see, unless and until the state develops, country cannot develop. The development of the state, if state is transferring all its good officials to the central government, then what would happen to the state? All right, so they are not willing. So this may not be very suitable to the federal structure, but the system is there that you need to understand. All right. Now, the last point, though I had said earlier that was the last point, but let me complete one more area. Grading of the secretarial officers. Grading I will talk about. Okay, first we'll be talking about the top management. Okay, grading of the secretary office. First we'll be talking about the top management. Top management, you have a secretary, additional secretary, and joint secretary. Secretary, additional secretary, and then you have the joint secretary. Now, at the top level, you have 1, 2, 3 officials. They are the top management. Okay. So then you have 3 officials. All right. Now, he is the overall departmental head. Secretary is overall departmental head. Now, he is overall heading the department. All right. It is chief policy maker, chief decision maker, responsible for all the policy planning, all policy formulation. So he is secretary top management. A secretary is the departmental head, and he is responsible for all policy planning, all policy formulation, overall responsibility. All right. Then these two people, secretary and assistant and additional secretary, they are either head of a department within that ministry, or they are head of a wing. There is no watertight rule. All right. So departmental head, all right, or a wing head. They could be heading a particular department within a ministry. So there would be a department within a ministry, and they could be heading that department. All right. So, or there could be a wing. We have already discussed that structure, and they could be heading that. These two officials. I'm talking of the I'm talking of departmental head and wing head. This is not the. This is additional secretaries and joint secretaries. They could be working as departmental head. Okay, they could be working as in charge of a department or in charge of a wing. So, secretary is overall responsible for the entire ministry, and additional secretary and joint secretary, they could be either head of a department or they could be head of a wing. Okay. Then at the middle management level, we have a director, or we have a deputy secretary, or we have an under secretary. Okay. So director, deputy secretary, or under secretary, they come under the middle management level. These 3 officials come under the middle management level, and now they are head of a different division. So there would be different division of a department, and director or deputy secretary, they are heading that division. All right. And their job is they act on behalf of the secretary. All right. They act on behalf of the secretary, and only on important matters they consult him. All right. They consult him, they assist him, but otherwise they are working independently. So, but they are working on behalf of the secretary. So, divisional directors or deputy secretaries, they are the divisional heads. All right. Now, so far as under secretary is concerned, he is head of a branch. All right. Under secretary, head of a branch. So, at the middle management, you have a director and deputy secretaries. They are head of a division, and then you have and they work independently, but they report to the secretary. Okay, they report to the secretary, and then you have under secretary who is head of a different branch. He is head of a branch. All right. So this is, you have the top level management, and you have the middle level management in the secretary in the secretariat. All right. Now. Sometimes the under secretary, since he is heading a branch, he could also be known as a branch officer. So do not get confused. Under secretary could also be known as branch officers. All right. And the last point is that sometimes you must have heard there is an OSD, officers on special duty. All right. Because of some emergency kind of situation, or because of some essential function that might have cropped up in any ministry. All right. undertake that responsibility, or to undertake a emerging project. So sometimes we designate a post within a central secretariat, and they are called officer on special duty, means they are assigned for a specific task. All right. Now OSD could be of any rank. He could be a rank of secretary also, but he is usually from a very higher rank. So he could be a secretary, he could be a deputy secretary, and he could be a joint secretary also. Means which rank official would be undertaking the post of OSD, that is not confirmed. So it could be a secretary rank official also, or it could be a joint deputy secretary rank officer also, or it could be a joint secretary level officer also. But there is a post of OSD which is created. It is not a permanent post. Once the task is over, when the task is over, then OSD would be living. But this is for a particular or specific kind of project that may occur in any department or in a ministry. So for that, so usually OSD is somebody who is a very well experienced person, and for a specific task he is made the head of that particular department. So officer on special duty is sometimes you have this post. Okay, the status is not fixed, and they can vary from secretary to under secretary. The status is not fixed, means OSD status not fixed. In one of the examinations they had asked this question, prelims question, what was the status of the OSD? So status is not fixed. All right. All right. So that was about the OSD. So what we have done today, just let me give you overview, and we'll be starting from there. Okay. What we have done today, I have just given you an overview of what we call all the central secretariat. First of all, I talked about the structure of the government, the parliamentary government, presidential government, unitary government, federal government, how the system works in India, what is the difference between US system and Indian system and the British system. So after giving you a background of the structure of the government, then I shifted to the structure of the central government, and in that context we talked about the ministries and departments. I talked about central secretariat. I told you about allocation of business rules. Article 77, which is a very crucial article for this portfolio system, structure of the ministry, structure and hierarchy of the secretarial organization, split system, role and function of the secretariat, tenure system, grading system. Okay, so these are the things that we have discussed today, and in the next class we will be proceeding from here further. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you.